perspective now from Barbara Walter, a professor of political science at the University of California in San Diego. She's also author of the forthcoming book, How Civil Wars Start and How to Stop Them. I appreciate you joining us. I want to jump right to the title of your book because it's a fascinating subject. In the civil wars you looked at, how do civil wars get started, and how close do you think is the United States?
Yeah. Anderson, I've been studying civil wars for the last 30 years in places like Syria, Iraq, Mozambique, Northern Ireland. And one of the things that we've learned is that certain factors tend to emerge across cases no matter where these civil wars break out. Over the last 5 years, I've been watching what's happening here in my own country. And one of the things that I've seen is that these same factors are emerging here in the United States, and they're emerging at a surprisingly fast rate. That's the reason why I wrote this book.
So what factors are you talking about? What specifically do you look at? I mean, Mozambique, you had Renamo, which was very violent. I mean, the Mozambique Civil War was incredibly violent. What are the parallels?
Yeah, so we don't look at individual cases. For 4 years, since 2017, I was on a task force run by the U.S. government called the Political Instability Task Force. And one of our jobs was to come up with a predictive model of where around the world, not here in the United States, where across the globe political instability and political violence was likely to break out. And we put in 56 different factors, from poverty to income inequality, all the things we could possibly think of that might lead a country down the path towards war. And to our surprise, 2 factors were by far the most important. The first was what we called anocracy. That's a fancy term for partial democracy. It's governments that are neither fully democratic nor fully autocratic. There's something in between. And the second important factor was whether citizens, the population of these countries, broke down along racial, ethnic, and political, ethnic, and religious lines, formed political parties along those lines, and then tried to capture power to exclude everyone else. So it was this mix of anocracy and racial politics that were the 2 best predictors of civil war. And of course, when you hear that and you think about our country, our democracy has been declining over the last 5 years. In fact, right after January 6th of last year, our country was classified for the first time as an anocracy since 1800. The United States is no longer the world's longest lasting democracy. That honor goes to Switzerland. And of course, our politics have become increasingly defined not by political ideology, but by race.
So how does a place step back from the brink of this?
So we do also understand this, and I guess there's 3 things that I'd want to tell the American public. The most important thing is simply for citizens to be aware of the dangers of democratic decline. Don't be complacent about this. I talk to a lot of people, and many of them don't feel particularly worried about what's happening with our democracy because they're thinking about authoritarian regimes, and they know that it's a very, very long road before we become like in Iran. So they're not threatened by it. What they don't know is that there's this in-between stage that can be quite unstable and quite violent. And that's the direction the United States is heading. So we know the warning signs of civil war. And if we know them, we can do something to prevent wars before they happen. The second thing I would say is to take partisan politics out of our elections. It's becoming increasingly easy for parties to meddle in the elections, and that's deeply undemocratic. And of course, the last thing is to strengthen our democracy. Our executive branch has become increasingly more powerful than every other branch. So we need to reinstate checks and balances on the executive. And we know, of course, that there's been voter suppression. And then there are real undemocratic elements of our democracy, like gerrymandering, like the Electoral College, like big money in politics. All of that needs to be reformed.
Yeah.
Full liberal democracies do not experience civil war.
Well, Barbara Walter, I look forward to the book. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.